Good evening and welcome to Novara Live. I'm Ash Sarkar, filling in for Michael Walker, who, don't worry, is alive and well. He just owes me money and will be locked into a cupboard until it's forthcoming. With me tonight, co-hosting, is Helena, aka No Justice MTG. Helena, how's it going?
I'll make sure I never take out a credit account with Ash Sarkar Industries, but outside of jesting, it's absolutely a pleasure to be joining you tonight.
Tonight, we will be talking about the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans who want to visit Aston Villa. We'll be talking about the latest with Prince Andrew and his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And is Uber heralding a future of infinite work? Stay tuned for all of that. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Israel resumed its intense bombardment of Gaza on Sunday, killing dozens of Palestinians in a clear violation of its ceasefire agreement with Hamas. The IDF has now killed at least 99 people and wounded 230 in the 10 days since the start of the US broken truce, which it is accused of violating at least 80 times. In one of those incidents, an Israeli tank fired on a bus in Gaza City, killing 11 members of the same family, including 7 children. A relative of the victims described the aftermath of the attack to Al Jazeera. For those listening on the podcast, the relative was saying, quote, "They are torn to pieces. I don't know if I'm saying goodbye to my son or my daughter, my son's children or my daughter's children." Israel claims that it was Hamas who violated the ceasefire, including with an attack in Rafah that killed 2 IDF soldiers. But Dropsite News journalist Ryan Grimm said he had confirmed with US officials that Hamas was not responsible for that incident. He posted this on X. Soon after the explosion in Rafah, the White House and Pentagon knew that the incident was caused by an Israeli settler bulldozer running over unexploded ordnance, contradicting Netanyahu's claim that Hamas had popped up from tunnels. After Netanyahu said he was blocking all aid from entering Gaza in response and unleashed a bombing campaign, the administration conveyed to Israel that they know what happened. Netanyahu then announced he would reopen the crossings in a few hours. Now, it's only been a week since Donald Trump flew to Israel to announce to the Knesset that he had succeeded in bringing peace to the region. Today, his son-in-law Jared Kushner and his Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff landed in Tel Aviv in an apparent bid to stop the ceasefire from collapsing. J.D. Vance is expected to visit tomorrow. Another accusation from Israel is that Hamas is refusing to return the remains of some Israeli captives in violation of the ceasefire deal. This is what Kushner had to say about that in an interview with 60 Minutes.
Are you saying publicly right now that Hamas is acting in good faith, seriously looking for the bodies?
As far as we've seen from what's being conveyed to us from the mediators, they are so far. That could break down at any minute, but right now, we have seen them looking to honor their agreement.
So it looks as if, at least for now, the Trump administration is leaning on Netanyahu to keep the US-backed plan intact. But Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has made it clear he wants to continue Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza.
ומטרת המלחמה זה הדבר הכי חשוב, לפרק את החמאס, לא לגבות מחיר. לא שישלם מחיר, לפרק אותו, שלא יהיה קיים. ראש הממשלה הבטיח לי, ואני אעמוד במושב הזה, שזה מה שהוא הולך לעשות. אני קורא לראש הממשלה, הגיע הזמן להתעשת, לחזור ללחימה עצימה, לכבוש, לכתוש, לנצח.
In the video, he says he wants a, quote, return to intense fighting, to conquer, to crush, to win. Despite that, Israel officially says it has returned to observing the agreement and is once again allowing in aid. The UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees, however, says not enough is getting in. They blame bureaucratic constraints. But of course, it is Israel that ultimately dictates what enters Gaza and when. Helena, how would you describe this state of affairs. So officially a ceasefire is in place, but it looks like Israel can violate it whenever it chooses. Is this simply a new phase in the genocide, a more sort of staccato barrage of violence, sort of followed by a little bit of a ceasefire before it begins again?
I mean, what it is, it's kind of a more intense version of what the status quo was pre-October the 7th, right? No matter how many times people try and say, well, October the 7th was when the conflict began, anyone who understands the conflict knows that that's not the case, insofar as Israel has been continually engaging in belligerent acts against Palestinians, both in Gaza, but of course also in the West Bank, which is a whole separate story that the media seems to conveniently forget, given the expansion of settlements, the expansion of settler violence in these areas that's been happening daily. Again, not just for the last 2 years, but for the last half a century. That's the reality of what life is like for Palestinians. And this, as you say, staccato position where sometimes there's violence and sometimes there's the ceasefire, as it's called, right? It's just what its life has been like. When Israel feels like it, they will do what's called mowing the lawn, essentially showing the Palestinians who's boss. And fundamentally, I think a lot of this is the Israeli government as it exists at the moment, given not only the fact that we have a very far-right person in charge in Netanyahu, but even further right people like Ben Gvir from the Jewish Power Party, who wants to ensure that they have this display of power towards their own electorate, towards the people within Israel, who fundamentally we've seen from how they get polled in terms of their opinions of the Palestinians, don't particularly hold them in very high regard and want to see the strongman leadership that they elected Netanyahu for in the first place displayed in terms of their way in which that they deal with the Palestinians, right? Of course, there'll be some people out there who want to see it because they genuinely are being sold the idea that this is necessary to take out Hamas, but I don't think you can necessarily say that's the case when you're killing busfuls of civilians, right? That's the reality, of course, and has been the reality for ages, insofar as the IDF's continual military campaign across the Palestinian territories, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, is essentially to keep people in line. It is to make sure the Palestinians know who's boss. Whilst I think the ceasefire probably will hold, if the Trump campaign is so dependent upon this continuing, which it looks like they are, given the kind of shifting in terms of internal American politics against Israel, or at the very least against the kind of carte blanche, blank check that America has given Israel up to this point, given the drifting away of the MAGA base towards kind of Marjorie Taylor Greene position of why should this other country have so much power over us, right? Trump will not want to see that break down. And I think that he will be likely to pull levers to ensure that it continues at least towards a level that we haven't seen. The question, of course, revolves around, do we move to a second stage? Do we actually expand the so-called line that they've created, which is what has given a kind of a de facto annexation, really, of the outer reaches, the kind of perimeter of Gaza, also in terms of the same way that they've been slowly encroaching into the West Bank for so long. That's where my thoughts are at the moment. It is, do we actually return to some kind of actual Palestinian state that has been now ratified by a bunch of countries that would usually be very pro-Israel, which actually represents what the Gaza Strip was before October the 7th? Obviously, we'll need to see what the kind of political processes are, who's in charge of that. But if Israel don't actually withdraw, if they say, well, we can never move past this first phase because you've not found us 5 bodies that are under all the tons of rubble from the apartment buildings that we've demolished, then we can never retreat from the new line that we've created that shrinks the size of the actual enclave in the Gaza Strip, then that will essentially have become a de facto annexation. I think when you look at the fact that even in all the time leading up to October the 7th, Israel so tightly controlled what went into Gaza that we're banning things like cookies because they might be turned into Qassam rockets, is the kind of situation that we're in now, where some aid can get in, but not all of the aid can, because fundamentally, as soon as they actually allow Palestinians the freedom to be able to travel, or indeed the freedom to get access to the aid that the world wants to bring in, it undermines that show of force that has been the kind of the preserve of Netanyahu's premiership, right? If you keep the Palestinians subdued through the control of the borders, from the control of what gets in or out, and indeed from sporadic military attacks, then they'll get too big for their boots, which is what the citizens of Israel don't want and what they elect Netanyahu to do. So we'll have to see how this goes on. But of course, fundamentally, until we actually see freedom for Palestinians, then it's all much of a wash to me.
It was just a few days ago that Keir Starmer condemned the decision made by authorities in the West Midlands to ban Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from an upcoming match against Aston Villa. The Prime Minister said on social media, quote, "This is the wrong decision. We will not tolerate anti-Semitism on our streets. The role of the police is to ensure all football fans can enjoy the game without fear of violence or intimidation." Sadly, anti-Semitism struck again last night when the Tel Aviv derby between Hapoel and Maccabi had to be called off due to rioting. The match was supposed to take place at Bloomfield Stadium on Sunday night. Police footage showed fans throwing projectiles and flares onto the pitch. Unrest also broke out outside the stadium. Israeli police arrested 9 people and detained 16 others for questioning. Several police officers and civilians were injured in the violence. Police called the incident, quote, "a breach of order and serious violence." They decided the game could not safely go ahead. Maccabi blamed Hapoel fans for throwing flares and causing the postponement. Last week, West Midlands police said they did not want Maccabi fans to attend due to the risk of violence. The police didn't clarify whether they were more concerned about protecting the fans from protesters or protecting local residents from the fans. All major party leaders interpreted the decision as an admission that police could not guarantee the safety of Jewish football supporters. Now, West Midlands Police has not challenged this interpretation, but reading the police statement, it seems they may have feared violence sparked by provocative behaviour from both sides. Independent MP Ayub Khan had campaigned for the match to be cancelled and welcomed the decision. He then faced heavy criticism on social media for his stance. His only notable political backing came from other independent MPs and the Green Party. Public opinion, however, supported the police decision. Here's some polling conducted by YouGov. So, as you can see, 42% of those asked said they thought it was the right decision, that the police classified the fixture as being at high risk. 28% thought that it was the wrong decision to bar away fans, and 30% said they don't know. The general public, however, found their opinions were out of step with the nation's columnists and commentators. In a frankly bizarre article, which seemed to spend a lot of its word count blaming Zach Polanski for God knows what, The Guardian's chief sports writer, Barney Ronay, wrote this. Even without hard evidence that Maccabi fans wanted to start trouble, the idea this could be seen as an act of de-escalation is basically nuts. What do we think is going to happen now, even if this act of peacekeeping is reversed? That the game is going to pass in a doe-eyed spirit of love for all? That it will be less, not more contentious as a result of this act of heavy-handed prohibition? It's a terrible moment for Birmingham, which might be better off worrying about the huge rise in reported anti-Semitic hate crimes in the West Midlands, quite a feat given how few Jewish people actually live there. Most obviously, it is an alarmingly feeble admission of inadequacy on the part of the British police, whose entire job description is to preserve order while upholding the law. The argument Ronay is making is that Maccabi Tel Aviv fans are being singled out specifically because they're Jewish. It takes him literally 14 paragraphs to mention what happened in Amsterdam last year, and neglects to mention that in Amsterdam, Maccabi fans chanted, quote, "Death to Arabs," tore down Palestinian flags and burned a taxi. There's no mention of their chants about how, quote, "there are no schools left in Gaza because there are no children left in Gaza." And despite finding time for an in-depth analysis of Zach Polanski reciting a poem by Benjamin Zephaniah, Barney Ronay doesn't talk about the rape song. If you haven't heard it, it's a charming little ditty performed by the club's ultras. According to the Maccabi Tel Aviv fan website, its lyrics translate to, quote, "You are Arab whores. We are ashamed of you. At the end of the day, Gate 5, we will fuck you. We will fuck you, and then we will drink your blood. And in the city square, we will hang every communist who comes here. We will take your girls who love to go wild. When we rape them, we will shout, Today is the day of death. Barney Ronay wasn't the only person who thought that Maccabi Tel Aviv might have been unfairly singled out. Here's Trevor Phillips interviewing Ed Miliband on his show yesterday.
Has anybody in government actually considered whether this is legal? Because looking back to a previous existence of mine, I suspect that banning Israeli fans or the fans of an Israeli club might be unlawful under the Equality Act because it applies a condition to a particular group of people.
Well, look, I'm not sort of, I don't know about that question, but I think the question really for us is to make sure that the match can go ahead with all of the fans there.
All right.
And that's what we're working towards. I think, from across the political spectrum, people said it was not the right decision. But we've got to understand the police make operational decisions about matters. We now are working with them, with the local authorities and others.
And of course, what would any centrist freakout be without some quality Dan Hodges content? Here's a post of his on X replying to Mehdi Hassan. So Mehdi said, think about how much the UK media has gaslit us over the past few days. It was never about anti-Semitism. It was about Israeli football hooligans. To which Dan Hodges quote tweeted, note, not football hooligans, but Israeli football hooligans. They're a special kind of hooligan, apparently. I wonder what it is that makes them different. So what I find frustrating as a football fan is that all these commentators and politicians are behaving as though this kind of thing never happens. But in recent years, West Ham, Ajax, Legia Warsaw, Eintracht Frankfurt have all faced bans on away fans. In fact, Israeli clubs have gotten away lightly compared to other countries, who also have ultra-nationalist ultras sections. The most pertinent comparison is probably how Serbian football clubs have been treated. This is from the Associated Press in August. UEFA fined Partizan Belgrade more than $100,000 on Wednesday and ordered part of the Serbian club stadium closed at one European game for fans' racist and political statements. Fans displayed a, quote, Kosovo is Serbia banner and chanted discriminatory and offensive slogans at 2 home games in Conference League qualifying rounds. The order to close a 10,000-seat section of Partizan Stadium will apply at the team's next home game in a European competition. Serbian football culture has a long record of ultra-nationalism, racist chanting, and the glorification of war crimes. In 2021, the referee had to halt play in a match between Novi Pazar FC and Belgrade club Partizan FC because, around at the 60th minute, Partizan supporters shouted Ratko Mladic's name and the infamous chant Nož, Zica, Srebrenica, which means knife, wire, Srebrenica. It goes beyond the club level too. The Serbian national team has also faced punishment for racist and discriminatory chanting. This is from the BBC from September of this year. Serbia have had numerous punishments from both UEFA and FIFA in recent years. Here is a selection of those from the past 3 years. 2025, partial stadium closure for this England game following discriminatory abuse against Andorra. 2024, partial stadium closures for 2 home matches and banned from selling tickets for away games following discriminatory abuse, including reportedly trying to burn an Albania flag and damage caused in 2 Nations League matches. 2024, the Serbian FA fined £12,250 after objects were thrown and a provocative message was displayed during their Euro 2024 defeat by England. 2023, partial stadium closure for fans' discriminatory abuse during a win over Montenegro. 2022, the country's FA fined around £18,000 after a flag showing Kosovo as part of Serbia with the phrase, "We do not surrender," was hung in the dressing room for a game against Brazil at the World Cup. Now, I've had a look. I can't find any evidence of UK politicians or pundits being worried that Serbian football fans were being unfairly discriminated against. What's more, I didn't find Trevor Phillips or Dan Hodges complaining when FIFA and UEFA banned Russian teams from all competitions after the invasion of Ukraine. The line from centrist pundits is that Israeli football fans are being unfairly singled out. But from what I can see, it's actually the opposite. What they want is for Israeli football clubs and their supporters to be given special exemption from the sanctions applied to other clubs. Israel isn't unique in having racist and violent football fans. In fact, even as I say this, a Chelsea supporter somewhere is probably screaming, "We did it first!" But what is unique is how anything to do with Israel gets covered in the media. Rather than looking at this as a football story, where clashes between racist away fans and the local community aren't exactly unheard of, it's being viewed through the lens of Israeli exceptionalism. Israeli fans get to maraud as they wish through European cities, chant whatever they want, and if you object to it, you're anti-Semitic. Quick update on the story. Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy gave a reply to an urgent question in the Commons this afternoon.
Can I thank him for bringing this urgent question to the House? I know it's of concern to so many parliamentarians and so many people outside of this place. And can I thank him for the tone that he's adopted? I've watched with dismay as there have been people in this debate who've sought to use this moment to heighten tensions. And I want to commend him for the way that he's conducted himself and his part in this. He asked a particularly important question about who will pay. Across government, we are united. The Home Secretary, myself, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister and the Community Secretary are united in saying that we will find the resources that need to be made available once the West Midlands Police has come forward with the risk assessment, and will work with as one government to make sure that those resources are forthcoming because of the important principle, fundamental principle that is at stake about what sort of country we are. He asked if I was confident that the decision was made based on the right information. I've seen a lot of facts flying around that don't seem to have any evidential basis, particularly on social media in recent days. We're working with our international partners to make sure that West Midlands Police have the fullest range of information on which to base an assessment. He mentioned also the impact that this is having on the Jewish community. I absolutely feel and understand that, and I've had numerous conversations with members of the Jewish community over the last few days. We have experience of policing events in this country, vast experience of policing events in difficult circumstances. And he's right to say that there are a minority of supporters in every club, and in this club in particular, whose behaviour is reprehensible. But that is not the case for all fans. And what is astonishing in this case is that it is unprecedented in modern times that all away fans have been banned because of the behaviour of a small minority. So we're working with the police to try and support them to be able to look at that in the round. He's right to say that we need action, not just warm words. I am particularly concerned, having met with Jewish fans, about the way that some of the events in the Middle East are not just having an impact on national competitions, but are also having an impact on grassroots sport as well. And it's something that I've committed to working with them on, to make sure that young people in this country can turn up to local grassroots events and not feel anxious about participating or not being able to participate because of who they are. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, he asked if he asked about the signal that this sends to others around the world. That is not lost on us. We are a tolerant, diverse nation, and Birmingham, as one of our great cities, is a great example of that. That is what we're fighting to uphold and defend. That's the Britain that we believe in. And the message from this government is that this government will always defend that country. We are a better country than some of the comments that have been made and the actions that have been taken in the last week, and we're determined to uphold that.
Helena, the government are saying that they're going to wait on the risk assessment from West Midlands Police, but it seems quite likely that they are going to overturn the ban on away fans. So does that mean that the government will be held responsible if those away fans participate in the kind of racist chanting that we've seen from them, basically wherever it is that they go?
One can only assume that they won't be held account, in the same way that we continue being told that the provocations made by those same fans in Amsterdam were really the fault of the people of Amsterdam and not indeed the fans themselves, right? Like, that's the status quo that we have. I don't imagine that will get overturned. And in fact, the fact that they are trying to move heaven and earth to get these people here, and are wanting to increase the funding for West Midlands Police so that they can have the extra manpower that they need to be able to police these people and to police the event there. Well, at the very least, the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were promised that allocation of the Home Office budget 3,000 years ago. But what I will say, it is sweet at the moment to get at least some amount of vindication, right? It's very kind of peak Starmer, really, for him to make this outward statement about how ridiculous it is that these fans are getting banned just for being Israeli rather than for their own actions, and for them those own actions to be telegraphed to the world in Tel Aviv, so much so that the football match between those two rival teams has to get cancelled, right? It is actually peak British politician, just inverting reality and then hours later getting contradicted by very obvious facts that everyone could see beforehand. I hope plenty of people have apologies prepared for Ayub Khan and Iqbal Mohammed, the MPs from the region of the country who were the ones who were leading the petitions to ensure these people weren't coming here to commit that hooliganism in the first place. I've seen plenty of deleted tweets from people who made pretty strong statements a few days ago who are now currently eating humble pie, given what we've seen out of Tel Aviv in the last couple of days. But some of the reactions have been, quite frankly, mind-boggling, haven't they? We had that clip that you showed there of Trevor Phillips saying, maybe this violates the Equality Act. It's a specific group being targeted. Well, I didn't realise, Trevor, that football hooligans were a protected characteristic. There's news to me because, of course, as has been pointed out many times now, this has been a punishment that's been applied to very many different football fans who have engaged in such behaviour beforehand, where they've either been played in neutral venues or whether indeed they have been banned from those away matches altogether. This isn't new. It's not unprecedented in the modern era, as Lisa Nandy said and as you expertly debunked in the segment there. And the fact that everyone is treating that it is makes me feel like I'm living in a completely different reality to people and I've seen completely different things. But fundamentally, the reason that we're in this position is we've got this really kind of dangerous confluence going on here. First of all, as the conservative kind of people who are using this as an excuse to be able to attack multicultural Britain, right? We've seen the comments from people like Robert Jenrick talking about how it's a failure of integration, that we can't even welcome Jewish people when, of course, there are plenty of Jewish people in Birmingham, where like British Jews can turn up to the match to support Aston Villa, or if they're a neutral fan to go to that venue. It's nothing about ethnicity that's the issue here. But of course, this is all feeding into his Handsworth video, anti-multiculturalism, failure of integration shtick that he's trying to stake his mast into as his political platform. So, of course, something that can be weaponized against people in this country by saying, you're unwelcome, you're a no-go zone for Jews, is the implication here, perfectly dovetails into what he was already campaigning about. So far, so conservative. We've seen this over and over and over again. I even saw a Tory MP called Ayub Khan, the MP himself, unintegrated for opposing this level of fan hooliganism. We shouldn't be surprised, right? This is how these people act, but it is still a damning indictment of how the Conservative Party and conservative politicians are acting with response to the kind of Islamophobia that we've seen within their party since time immemorial. Where the EHRC investigation went on that one can only wonder why. The dangerous thing, though, is what this is in confluence with, which is a broader liberal section of our political and media establishment who have vested interests in preventing the public from understanding the reality of what Israeli society is like and what the kind of ultra-nationalist Israelis are like. They don't even want to think about or talk about the reality of what those people are, what they do and the things that they believe, and indeed their opinions about the Palestinians, or indeed their own Israeli comrades who fundamentally have different opinions on Palestinians, so much so that they will call the people they oppose in Israel as the whores of Arabs, right? That is the reality of the Kahanists, like the ultra-nationalists, who form up the part of that kind of Maccabi Tel Aviv ultra section of the fan base that has led to this ban happening in the first place. And since we have given this kind of veil of this idea of what Oliver Dowden called Israel being part of our Western family, right? We don't want people to understand that's the reality of Israeli society as a settler colony, otherwise it would undermine our diplomatic relationship with them. Things have reached a surreal nadir here, where we saw Gideon Saar tweet out that he had a conversation with Yvette Cooper, first of all talking about this ban on away fans as if it is somehow a damning indictment of our country and not theirs, and second of all try and convince our government to put bans on the phrase "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." This coming from somebody who entered politics, that is Gideon Saar, who, as a member of the Likud party, whose founding charter that they still hold dear to, considers Israel being from the river to the sea as well. a nice dose of hypocrisy there. But it just shows the level to which our government is more occupied than the West Bank, in which these conversations are happening about an administrative decision of West Midlands police force being overridden by governments for political reasons because of their relationships with a foreign state. You really couldn't make any of this up, but that's the reality of living in topsy-turvy Britain in 2025.
I kind of don't know what to say about this because the gaslighting is so total. I mean, the UK and England in particular has taken a really hard line on football hooliganism. And one of the things that you could say about it is that our football culture is too sanitized, too commercialized because of it, especially when you compare us to other European nations. But there is this one state of exception, which is Israelis get to do football hooliganism as a little treat on our shores, right? They get to do it as a little treat, right? Why? Because it's Israel. Because it's Israel, and if you don't let them do what they want, it's anti-Semitic. I tell you what I think, and I'll tell you what my honest opinion is here. And I'm speaking here as a single individual with an opinion. This is not the Novara media line. This is nothing other than what I think. I actually think at this point the government should intervene. They should say, right, we're going to overturn the ban on away fans. I think that the community in Birmingham should absolutely stay inside, not take to the streets. You know, whatever community self-defense there is has to be really, really limited to residential areas. And let these Maccabi Tel Aviv fans do what it is they do, which is horrendous acts of racist chanting, vandalism, complete mindless fascist thuggery, and let this be entirely on the government's head. Entirely on the government's head. That's what I think. Because if there is any element of community self-defense, this is going to be spun as a Muslim anti-Semitism story. And it's then going to be all about, has the UK allowed these Islamic enclaves to take root in this country? Jewish people aren't safe in Birmingham, rah, 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 rah. That's what the story is going to be if there's even an ounce of community self-defense. So let the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans do what it is they do and let it be on the government's head. But hey, that's just my opinion. Prince Andrew has given up all his royal titles as more allegations emerge relating to his ties to child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. This comes ahead of the posthumous publication of a memoir tomorrow by Virginia Giuffre, who said she was trafficked by Epstein at the age of 16 and then, at age 17, forced to have sex with the prince on 3 different occasions. Giuffre wrote in the memoir that she was worried she would die as a sex slave to Epstein and his associates. Prince Andrew has repeatedly denied the allegations against him. This is what he said in his recent statement. In discussion with the King and my immediate and wider family, we have concluded the continued accusations about me distract from the work of His Majesty and the royal family. I have decided, as I always have, to put my duty to my family and country first. I stand by my decision 5 years ago to stand back from public life. With His Majesty's agreement, we feel I must now go a step further. I will therefore no longer use my title or the honours which have been conferred upon me. As I have said previously, I vigorously deny the accusations against me. Gloria Allred, a lawyer representing Epstein's victims, gave her views on the Prince's statement to Sky News.
I suppose my first question is, I assume that you welcome this decision to remove these royal titles?
Well, I think so. It's not everything in terms of a measure of justice. It's some consequence. It's very disturbing that the reason given is that somehow it's a distraction. The idea that Jeffrey Epstein, for example, victimized children, molested children, sex trafficked children, and Virginia Giuffre's allegations are just a distraction that will continue, I think is an insult, frankly, to victims, because really what it's saying is it's continued bad PR for the monarchy. Well, what about the victims?
It looks like the Prince's statement was meant to get ahead of reports in the Mail on Sunday and the Sunday Telegraph. In those, he's accused of asking the Met Police to help him dig up dirt on Giuffre in 2011. The reports say that the prince handed over Giuffre's date of birth and social security number to his police protection officer and asked them to find incriminating information about her. The Met says it's looking into the claims. But that's not all King Charles has to worry about. A spokesperson has told reporters the palace is bracing for, quote, more days of pain this week. That will involve dealing with the fallout of yet another allegation. This one about Sarah Ferguson, the prince's, i.e. Prince Andrew's, ex-wife and current housemate, visiting Epstein after he got out of prison. Epstein reportedly wrote an email to his lawyer in the UK, Paul Tweed, claiming that Ferguson and her daughters came to see him and that she, quote, was the first to celebrate his release. In that email, the sex trafficker seemed upset about an interview Ferguson gave a month earlier to the Evening Standard. In it, she apologised for accepting £15,000 from Epstein to help her pay off her debts. She said, "A terrible, terrible error of judgment was made by having anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. What he did was wrong, and for which he was rightly jailed." Epstein told his lawyer, however, that then Duchess of York should come out and say she was misquoted. He added, "She was the first to celebrate my release with her two daughters in tow. She visited me with a policeman sitting at my front desk. She has asked for help with her charities." Helena, obviously, Prince Andrew still gets to call himself a prince because he was the son of a reigning monarch. But do you think that the abdication of titles like the Duke of York is going to do anything in terms of the public heat he's attracting for the allegations that he raped Virginia Giuffre when she was being trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein?
I don't think, again, it will do anything to help, really. I mean, fundamentally, I think it will overwhelmingly increase people's opinion of the monarchy, who are previous monarchy, who are or existing monarchists, I guess, who had their relationship turned sour because of these allegations. It will, I guess, in their mind, kind of clean the monarchy of the association of Prince Andrew, because it's about the title, it's about the prestige that surrounds the monarchy that a lot of people who are monarchists are attracted to, or at least kind of the fans of the royals, right? But in terms of the broader population, I don't think they're really concerned necessarily about the titles or his relationships to the monarchs. Most people actually don't think really care about the royal family hugely in that regard. The concerns that people are going to have, and I think the concerns that they are right to have, is about the level to which the people in positions of power, whether they are, aristocratic or from the royal family, or whether they are political or anything like that, the level of power that these people have had for so long, to have been able to get away with these things for so long, to get away with these things for so long, and to feel like they were completely invincible and above scrutiny, to the point at which that it's only just now that these things are coming out in the wake of what we're seeing overseas, is the real damning indictment here. I mean, we saw the most obvious example of the way in which people feel like that they are unable to be hurt by these allegations, or unable to be hurt by their links to Jeffrey Epstein, insofar as Keir Starmer didn't even think twice, or at least Morgan McSweeney didn't think twice, about appointing Peter Mandelson, who was self-proclaimed the best pal of Jeffrey Epstein, to a position of incredibly office, like being the ambassador to the United States, right? People genuinely had this kind of feeling that they were untouchable for so long because of the privilege and the shield that they had around it, insofar as they're still spending time conversing with Jeffrey Epstein after the conviction of him had been secured. And it's this one rule for them and one rule for everybody else that we continually get examples of in politics that people are really, really sick of. And that's fundamental. And it doesn't just talk about like kind of cultural institutions or cultural problems. It's obviously an economic problem as well. And that's what people see in terms of both obviously people part of the monarchy and the royal family, or indeed people who are in politically or in terms of the media class, who haven't been held to the same standards as everybody else would. It fundamentally runs through so much of our politics. And whilst I think that plenty of countries have this problem, it's very unique to the UK because of our incredibly long and storied and big history of having a real kind of stratification by class in this country, where it's never been the case that people from lower classes are held to lower standards than those from higher classes, and that's been reversed for a very, very long time. So we do have a really big problem in the UK very specifically because of that class system. And fundamentally, I think as people on the left, we want to break that thing down. And I think that pointing out that it goes through all the echelons of kind of the upper caste of society, that we're seeing all these problems in terms of them feeling untouchable and not being held to that same standard. We can really use that to appeal to people for greater equality and a greater degree to which people are treated on principle rather than on status, which is with which the opposite of this is currently the status quo in this country.
I wanna ask you a question and see what you make of it. And really, it's about the kind of impact that Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir might have. There is this sort of prurient fascination, I think, in terms of combing over the details of the sexual abuse that she endured. What's the difference between a media culture which is digging into those details because there is a horrible kind of thrill about it, and in a media culture which is taking those details seriously because the people who participated in her abuse need to be held to account?
I mean, I certainly think it's more likely the former than the latter. I mean, we fundamentally have always had in this country a media ecosystem that obviously, especially in an online era where AdSense revenue is what pays the bills, you have to engage in whatever is the most kind of clickbaity story. And you have to engage in the most kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? The most kind of startling of revelations to get people to interact with your media organization. Because if you don't get the clicks, you don't generate the revenue and you can't pay the bills. So I certainly think it is far more likely that it's about trying to chase these kind of stories for the ability to be able to get eyeballs on the website or watching whatever kind of media output that you're doing, that it is actually taking the concerns of women and girls seriously. Like, this reminds me indeed of the way in which we discuss trans people in this country, insofar as it's become a frivolous way for media organizations to be able to generate clicks by finding a cause for people to link to their reporting or to their media organization, than it is about the actual safety of women and girls, when the reality in this country is that rape is basically de facto legal. In the last parliament, we had Rishi Sunak stand up at the dispatch box and talk about the fact that they'd increased the conviction rate for rape in this country. It had gone up by like 1%, from 1.5% to 3%. Like, there are some real concerns that women and girls have in this country. And scandal, it makes a lot of headlines. Scandal is very easy to report on. Scandal gives people a lot of things that can be talked about over the water cooler. It can be a really good way of engaging people who are in the broader public to interact with news. But the broader statistics of what life is like for women in this country and across the world, I mean, I'm not saying that we are in any way as bad as some other places, but it's still a big problem, violence against women and girls. And the kind of things that happen to people like Virginia Giuffre is not taken seriously enough in terms of what we're actually going to do in terms of policy to sort those problems, have a material change, rather than talking about just how terrible all these things are that they're happening and doing nothing in terms of policy to tackle it. That's just my opinion.
Do you ever wonder whether letting just 3 companies control more than 60% of the world's cloud computing infrastructure might have been a bad idea? Well, today, a glitch in Amazon's cloud computing services resulted in a worldwide outage, impacting more than 1,000 companies and millions of users. Many popular apps and websites went down worldwide. Snapchat, Roblox, Signal, and Duolingo were hit, along with Amazon services like its main site and Ring doorbell. The US, UK, and Australia were amongst the worst affected. In the UK, Lloyds Bank, Halifax, National Rail, and HMRC's website all had outages. Other platforms included Wordle, Coinbase, Slack, Pokemon Go, Epic Games, PlayStation Network, and Peloton. So, what went wrong? This is from the BBC. Today's outage stemmed from Amazon's US East 1 region in Virginia, on the east coast of the US. This is the tech giant's original and largest location for its web services, and there are a lot of data centers there. It is known to many as a critical center for the global internet and is the default region for many users. But because of its age, size, and amount of on-demand capacity, it is prone to outages. This also highlights the huge challenge with so many businesses depending on single cloud computing regions from single cloud computing providers. Amazon Web Services controls about 1/3 of the cloud computing market, with Microsoft's Azure and Google controlling around another 1/3. Basically, the day-to-day functionality of the internet relies on a very small number of companies. And centralized systems mean that small problems have the potential to inflict massive disruption. Here's a rundown of recent outages, again from the BBC. July 2024, a dodgy piece of code in CrowdStrike cybersecurity software was automatically installed in computer systems, causing them to break down and display a blue screen of death error message. Some 8.5 million computers were rendered temporarily useless, knocking many internet services offline. October 2021, a configuration error brought down Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp for nearly 6 hours. Other sites, including X, were also disrupted due to the surge of new visits to their apps. June 2021, Amazon, Reddit, Twitch, GitHub, Shopify, Spotify, and several news sites were down for around an hour after a previously unknown bug was triggered accidentally by a customer at cloud computing service provider Fastly. December 2020, Gmail, YouTube, Google Drive, and other Google services went down simultaneously for around 90 minutes after the company said it encountered, quote, an internal storage quota issue. The tendency towards monopoly in tech isn't something that our government seems to be taking particularly seriously. In December 2023, Amazon Web Services secured £894 million in cloud spend across 3 contracts with the UK government on the same day. Just to be clear, government departments like the Home Office and the Department of Work and Pensions are granting huge contracts to American companies to run key bits of state infrastructure. That's taxpayer money flowing from us to outside of the UK to make American oligarchs even richer. Speaking of which, the government has granted permission for driverless taxis to begin a trial in London. This is from The Guardian. This week, Waymo, which successfully runs robo-taxis in San Francisco and 4 other US cities, announced it was bringing its cars to London. The detail remains scant, but the promise is eye-catching. The pioneering Silicon Valley company said it was bringing its fully autonomous service across the pond, where we intend to offer rides with no human behind the wheel in 2026. We can't wait to serve Londoners and the city's millions of visitors next year. Uber and the UK tech firm Wave have announced their plans to test their driverless taxis in London next year. This comes after the British government said it would speed up rules to let public trials happen before full self-serving vehicle laws are approved. So you can see the direction of travel here. Uber only made its first ever operating profit in 2023. It was kept afloat by venture capital injections and lines of cheap credit, which meant that it could move aggressively into markets and undercut taxi businesses, which paid their drivers more or, gave them things like sick pay and holiday pay. They spent heavily on court cases fighting their drivers on whether or not they were technically employees and lobbied top politicians for preferable treatment. And now, the plan is for those gig economy workers to be phased out entirely. But don't worry though, Uber has something for you to do in the meantime. That's right, it's train the very technology that's going to replace you in the labour market. Uber is introducing a new digital tasks program for its drivers. The pilot program, unveiled in the US last week, allows drivers to use the Uber Driver app to perform online tasks to train AI. That includes stuff like upload documents, voice notes, or photos. This is from Axios. Each task takes only a few minutes, pays a set amount, and appears in drivers' balances within 24 hours per Uber. A presentation from the launch event showed screenshots of the app paying 50 cents for a 2 to 3 minute task and $1 for a task that takes 1 to 3 minutes. But Uber says that the screenshots aren't representative of real tasks because the pilot isn't live yet. Pay will be determined at the task level based on its complexity and the time required, per Uber. The company says task availability depends on client needs, suggesting these are crowdsourced data jobs that may fluctuate in volume. Most AI systems need to be trained, at least in part, by humans. And there's a huge gap between how much this labeling work is worth to tech companies and how much workers are being paid to do it. Again, this is from Axios. Earlier this year, Meta paid around $15 billion in cash for a stake in labeling giant Scale AI and also poached its star CEO, Alexander Wang. In 2018, researchers estimated that by 2023, the global market for data labeling would reach more than $1 billion. In 2024, the market size was valued at nearly $4 billion, and it's expected to reach over $17 billion by 2030. In 2019, Axios called these data labelers AI sharecroppers, making anywhere from $2.50 to $15 an hour, depending on the work and where the workers lived. Amazon's Mechanical Turk project, for example, has been outsourcing digital tasks for pennies since 2005. Uber have been quick to clarify that drivers won't be able to perform these digital tasks while driving because of the obvious safety implications. But the big picture is this. As workers become more insecure, because now they're competing with robots, the expectations of the working day changes. We're supposed to fill every fleeting moment with super alienated, disjointed, and low-paid tasks. It would be great if a Labour government, supposed to be the party of workers, had anything to say about this, but I won't hold my breath. Helena, what do you make of all this? I know I've just smushed two stories together, but it does sort of seem to be related, that on the one part, you've got this huge concentration of cloud computing capacity in 3 companies, and any glitch or fuck up they make just impacts the rest of the world, stops the global economy in its tracks potentially. On the other hand, you've got this huge precarity looming over big swathes of the labour market because of AI.
I mean, fundamentally, the central problem of both of these problems is one of ownership. Like a good socialist, ownership is what I talk about a lot, but I think it's really pertinent in both of these cases, right? Insofar as both in terms of who we have to trust in terms of keeping hold of our data and keeping a lot of what is a huge part of the economy, like the internet afloat. We're looking at web services and hosting and cloud computing that is all based in Silicon Valley. Now, that means that we have essentially another country that we're entirely at the behest of for huge amounts of our economy to be able to keep going. Donald Trump is a bit of a strong man who is very happy to engage in some kind of interference in terms of trade relations or indeed business relations between countries. What he sees are the sovereign interests of the American people. It only takes one silly decision by Trump for all of those things to get cut away from us, or at the very least to be prohibitively more expensive. Whereas, of course, if that was anywhere outside Silicon Valley, that could be a decision that was taken in a sovereign manner by our own state or by a company in the UK. Fundamentally, as these things are essentially all rental, you are essentially renting out access to a server, meaning that it's very unproductive. I think that it would be best for the state to do this. I think this would be something that states should have access to in terms of having their own cloud computing setup, so that people sovereignly could be able to have access to that, and you don't have to worry about trade negotiations when you're engaging in that. The second problem, of course, is, as you've pointed out, that's loads of wealth being taken from communities in this country and being put into the hands of the shareholders of supranational corporations based in other countries, which is essentially, as has been happening throughout everywhere in neoliberal society, it's meaning that the money isn't staying there. Right, whether on a smaller community level or when it comes to like a national state level, that's money that's being siphoned out of the pockets of regular consumers. It's being siphoned out the pockets of small businesses and even medium-sized businesses in the UK, and being put into Silicon Valley and being enveloped, being kind of taken into this kind of black hole of financial, of where finances go if they go overseas, especially to the shareholders, which at this point, it's mostly other large asset management firms and largely in the United States as well. That's a real big problem when we want to have a sovereign economy in this country that works for the people of this country. If loads of the work that we do, loads of the wealth that we generate, that the work and the labor of people in this country generates, goes overseas. And of course, that is a neoliberalism problem. For all of Nigel Farage says about sovereignty in this country, he's very happy for us to be prostrated in the needs of American megacorporations, who are largely the ones who are economically aligned with his own political instincts, right? As a born-again Thatcherite. So that's the two problems of the ownership when it comes to cloud computing. When it comes to things like Uber, when it comes to things like rideshare applications and things like that, and the advent of things and new technologies that will take jobs away by automating them, fundamentally, I am no Luddite. I fundamentally don't think that labour is a good thing in and of itself. It is a means to an end to generate the wealth of society. I mean, if that labour can be automated so people don't have to do it, and so we could spend time doing other things, that's fundamentally a good thing. But what you're unable to get to that point is if the people who own the whatever machine it is, whatever application it is, whatever program it is that's automating the task that would usually be given to a worker, if that's owned not by the people who are having their jobs taken away, then all that's doing is putting people, as you say, into unemployment, or indeed having to change their remit into even more precarious gig work, as we're seeing with regards to being paid to train AI, which fundamentally they won't need to do anymore once AI becomes trained to the point where these people feel like it's necessary. Again, that's a job that's being taken away. And all of those productivity gains that you're getting from automating those jobs, from automating that sector of the economy, is going into the pockets of, you guessed it, into Silicon Valley. Right? It's all going into the hands of the shareholders of the asset management firms who own large parts in these companies, or the angel investors, rather than into the hands of the people doing the work. If these things were collectively owned via cooperatives or via the state, or indeed if states had any amount of fire to be able to go after these companies who were taking away these jobs to try and bring some of that revenue back, all we're going to see is more people at the bottom of the rung impoverished, more people having their industries taken away, and seeing nothing to replace them. This is fundamentally why universal basic services is more important than universal basic income, because UBI is that plaster that you put over the fact that an economy that's fully privatized, that's owned by tech oligarchs in this kind of techno-feudal dystopia that seems to be hurtling towards us at breakneck pace, the more you need to be able to use the power of the state to give people money to be able to finance, to be able to live, because they don't have jobs anymore and they don't own any of the companies that replace those jobs. Whereas if we actually had more nationalization, more public ownership, more worker ownership of these kind of firms, then this wouldn't be necessarily be as much of a problem. You'd be able to get the productivity gains and put them in the hands of the people. But that's not happening. At the moment, we are moving towards a system where ownership is the most important thing of whatever comes next. And at the moment, it seems like that's being subsumed by a very, very small, very, very wealthy, very, very politically connected group of people. And unless we have a real sea change in politics, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Helena.
Absolute pleasure, as always. Look forward to next time.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.